Well, welcome. Hi. Welcome. I'm very happy to be here today and to approach this subject about the Salem witch trials. I don't know if you know Diana. Diana up here. Okay. She has a genealogy website, and no, not a website, a site at church. And so she says to me, it was January or February, she said to me, Anoka Historical has called me. They're looking for someone who can give a presentation. And I go, oh, I can do that. I can give a presentation. And so that's how I got on this journey, because I knew from 2007 that our sister had done genealogy, and she found the fact that we had a member of the family who was, hi, Kathy. I was waiting for you, girl. Kathy and I got reacquainted with each other. Have a seat.
We're college roommates, but we won't say how long ago.
Yes, we're college roommates, and she met me here when I'm retired and moved back. And she stood in front of me and she says, well, guess who I am? It was in the 70s. And I go, I don't know. I have no idea. I'm fine. And she just kept bouncing around in front of me. Oh, she couldn't stand it. She couldn't stand it. And then when she told me, I was really surprised. So she doesn't live far from here, so she shows up every once in a while for me here. Okay, so I'm back. Okay, if you look, open up your handout. If you look, and it's that page there with the little picture with the grandmother, that's the work that my sister did. And that's how we found out, by her running that, that's how we found out that we had this ancestor. And so that was in 2007. And I just knew about it, but that's all. I didn't know anything else until Diana says to me, they need a speaker, they need a presentation, and I go, oh, I can do that on the Salem witch trials. And off and running I was, because of the fact that I knew nothing, and being retired, having all this free time on my hands. And it was January, and I just kept reading and writing and writing and reading, and got more shocked and more shocked as I read along. So if you look at the next page, it's a map. Okay, so that map there shows you, no, I have it, Barbara, it's okay. That map shows you Massachusetts Bay and the edge of Massachusetts, the outline, the coastline that's there. So the first thing to notice is at the very top of the map is Amesbury, and that's where our relative Susanna Martin lived with her husband, who was a blacksmith. And so she lived way up there. Then if you travel on down a little bit down that that coastline there, notice that there are two Salems. There's Salem Village and Salem Town. And when the Puritans came and they landed on there, they split the people that were on the boat by who were industrial people who could live on the coast, and then the agricultural people who lived in Salem Village, and they were about 10 miles north of where the first village was. So that's why there was two. And because of their vast difference between the amount of money that they were able to earn, and they had a lot of friction between the village and the town. Then the next big surprise to me was Boston. Boston is right there below Salem. And here, come to find out, it was the golden age of the pirates. The golden age of the pirates. And it was just so remarkable to me that should be going on at the very same time they were dealing with the Salem witch trials, which was just inland a few miles. And then I listed the pirates, the notorious pirate captains who were very active in the Massachusetts Bay, and they were active there during the summer. And the winter, they were down in Port Royal, Jamaica, is where they spent their winters. So all of that was going on. And then you have all of this green that shows the forest that was very much a part of their life. And if you turn the page to the next page, this is to me the best example I found in the forest. The forest was so intense, was so heavy, was so dark, was so evil to the Puritans that they were very, very much afraid of it, of what was in there, because they were sure that it was evil, that the devil lived in the forest. And they just were so frightened by it. And I ran across this picture here, and the reason I got so interested in this picture was of the depth, because to me it showed the forest in such an accurate way so that you could kind of get our idea of just how bleak and dark and sinister it looked. And then there were loons that were present in that countryside back then. And the loons, if you've ever heard a loon, now can you imagine the sound of a loon coming out of this vast amount of woods that went all the way from Maine down to Georgia? That would be enough to scare you to death. So they never went into the woods unless they absolutely had to. But the thing was, when they were sitting, before they came over, they were sitting in Holland and England, and they were talking about the kinds of things that they were going to expect when they came across the ocean. And they thought that if they stayed on the same latitude across, that they should experience in the new country the same kind of weather that they knew about in Holland and England. Well, boom, they did that. They expected that, and that's not what they got. They got snow 3 feet high, like they'd never seen before, and they got, in the summertime, it was very much very hot and steamy, and they weren't expecting that. And see, they really felt when they were sitting in the old country that God wanted them to come to the new country and improve it to the point where they would remove the trees and the sun would shine on this earth, and this earth would produce a phenomenal harvest for the people. But they had to improve and erase the forest first. Well, when they came, of course, they didn't have any axes, they didn't have any shovels, they didn't have any. And they had to build an ironworks industry in order to make instruments that they could use on these trees. So consequently, the trees stayed. They stayed forever. Anyway, so that's what first drew me to this picture. And then the fact that it said that this woman was a Salem witch. And I thought, well, I wonder who that is. Well, she turns out to be, her name is Sarah Good. And she was hung the same day as my grandmother. And they were hung together in 332 years ago. 332 years ago, and she's got quite the story. So that's what I ran into after I gave my presentation in Anoka. I ran into her, Sarah Good. Sarah is only 39 in that picture. She was 39 when she was hung. Grandma Susanna was 71 when she was hung. Grandma Susanna had been appointed or named a witch for 25 years. Anything that people didn't understand or anything that they couldn't cure as a disease, it was because the witches that were around were enabled all of this to happen. So it was their fault. They had to have somebody accept the fault for this. So this woman married. Her first husband died. And when he left a lot of debt when he died, first husband. Second husband comes along, and the rule of the day is you have to pay off the debt of your first husband. They paid off his debt, but they lost the house, they lost everything that, and the land that she had, everything was gone. And so they became beggars in the town. And they had to rent a home, rent a room within a family home, because there was no other way to live. And they had a child. She just, she looks ancient of days, but the poor thing was so haggard from life and from everything that had happened to her, and and then the fact that because she was, or the family was, such a constant presence in the town of always needing help, and then she didn't act like she was grateful for it. And she was just a complaining person, as you might think would happen. And so they end up, the town got together in the witch trials. She was one of the very first to be pointed at and convicted. She ends up in jail. While she's in jail, she discovers she's pregnant. So she stays the entire time in jail, pregnant, has the baby in jail. The baby dies. And the whole time this is going on with her, her 4-year-old daughter is in jail with her. And her daughter was acting out, so they put this poor kid in chains. So the kid was in chains for almost a year. And of course, she was in chains. And then, okay, I lost my train of thought. So then they hang her. The daughter goes with the father. They continue to be beggars the rest of their lives. And that's what happened to her. So no wonder she looks so tired and so in such agony because of everything that had transpired in her life. And the fact that she was hung, there were 5 women who were hung that day with my grandmother. Altogether, even though the information about the witch trials is immense amount of information, you can just zero it down to this 5-6 month period of time, which they hung 19 people, 19 women and 1 man, and they were all, as I wrote in this last, this came from the Kansas City School of Law, this fat, on page 5, this fat paragraph here, on page 5. And it says, scholars have noted potentially telling differences between the accused and the accusers in Salem. Most of the accused lived to the south of and were generally better off financially than those who were than most of the accusers. In the number of cases, accusing families stood to gain property from the convictions of accused witches. Also, the accused and the accusers generally took opposite sides in a congregational schism, which split the Salem community before the outbreak of hysteria. And scholars drew the conclusion that from these patterns it is property disputes and congregational feuds that played a major part in determining who lived and who died in 1692. And I think that's a very good summary of just what I read all winter about what happened there. So if we go back to Susanna had had her husband George, and for 25 years fingers had been pointed at her and said that you are a witch, even though she felt that she never was. And so her husband did protect her, that's for sure. But then he died. So he died, and so she was alone for about 8 years until she was hung herself. Anyway, oh man, Phyllis. she lived way up north there by the New Hampshire border. And she lived next to a man that had a herd of 30 oxen. And these oxen decided one day to go for a swim in the Merrimack River. And so they all go trooping over there, all 30 of them. Well, some of them forgot to inform the others that they couldn't swim. So that day, 21 oxen drowned out of that flock of, or herd of 30 oxen. And guess who got blamed? Grandma Susanna got blamed because her farm was on the border of his farm, and therefore it's your fault. Your fault that they went in the river and drowned. So that's the kind of stuff that was happening to her. So then when it comes the time that she is arrested because so many people are complaining about her, and she's brought forth in court and made to stand. Now, spectral evidence was the only time spectral evidence, and after the Salem witch trials, spectral evidence was outlawed. They didn't use it anymore. But what this is that if you see something and you say something, like if I pointed to Diana over here and I said to the judge over here, she hurt me, she pinches me, she pokes me, she throws me down to the ground. That is spectral evidence because I said it. She can deny it all she wants, but I said it. So it must be the truth. See? See how icky that is? And she could stand there and say, no, I don't do that. But people aren't going to believe her because she has such a history of finger pointing and saying she's a witch that they will believe anything that anybody says. And so, and you know not to take that personally. Okay. So, the thing is, too, that when you're in court, the judges here, you're standing by yourself all alone in front of all of these people. And they all are against you. There is no lawyer, there's nothing for you. You are totally alone. And they just question you. And so a part of what the questioning looks like is on page 4, there in the bottom where it says Susanna and laughter. She laughed at this procedure because there was nothing else to do. So it says there, at trial, Martin felt the whole affair was so ridiculous that she broke out into laughter, and the judge wasn't amused. He demanded of Martin, "What do you laugh at?" And Martin, still amused, answered, "Well, I may, with such folly." And the judge argued with Martin, and he asked, "Is this folly, the hurt of these persons?" And Martin responded, "I never hurt a man, a woman, or a child." And Mercy Lewis was a young person. She called out from the gathered witnesses. She hath hurt me a great many times and pulls me down. And Martin laughed again. And the judge asked her, well, what ails these people? And Martin shrugged and says, I do not know. And the judge asked sharply, but what do you think? And Martin replied, I do not desire to spend my thoughts on them. Meaning, I don't want to think about it. And Martin replied, no. Later the judge asked, tell me your thoughts about them. And then I really like this sentence when she replies to the judge, and she says, no, my thoughts are my own when they are in. See, my thoughts are my own when they are inside. Okay, but when they're out, when I speak about them, when they're out, they are another's. Later, when the judge asked Martin if she had compassion for the afflicted, she said, no, I have none. And the crowd erupted, and they fell from their seats to the floor. So can you imagine a overly crowded room of people clunking to the floor because she did it? Martin made a fool of the judges, and she had mocked her accusers. But more importantly, she had exposed the witch trials for what they were, a ridiculous farce. And then, during Martin's death dance, and this quote came out of the latest book written about her. And this book said, they called her a laughing witch. Well, this was, the laughter that she just, what else was there left to do but to laugh at these people? And they called her the laughing witch. And she said, and they said in this book, during Martin's death dance, the crowd looked on in a delight approaching orgasm. So we got that in there too. So anyway, that's a short little summary of everything that's in here. And I decided to just talk about parts of it. So if you go to page 3 and we look at the dates that's there, and it shows what a struggle it has been for Salem, for Massachusetts, to deal with this problem of witchcraft and this horrible thing that happened to them for 6 weeks. And how, and you think about people in town, in the area, all of a sudden 19 people don't exist anymore. These 19 people are gone. And like with Grandma Susanna, where she's buried, nobody knows. They just erased them, those witches. Okay, so then for 100 years, they never really dealt with this at all in any way, shape, or form. The town, that is. Until this man here is Charles Upham. He wrote the first book on the Salem witch trials 100 years after it happened. And he just took it on himself. The original books that he wrote, there were two books that he wrote on the witch trials. He gathered together every piece of paper he could find on them and condensed it in this book, or in the first two books. And then somebody took those books and condensed it in here. The thing that's important about this book is that 1,300 names of people who lived in the Salem, Salem was listed in this. And so the indexes fell out, but there's 1,300 names here of people that are listed in this book that have something to do with the witch trials. And you can, well, I'll pass this around. Diana, you want to take this? And you can look and see if you have any relatives that are listed there, because that's the one thing that has been very prevalent, is that the witch trial names, or the people involved in them, many people are related to this. And you can look it in the book. You can look up in the book if you find a name. Okay? Okay, so.
What's the name of the book?
Salem Witchcraft. Salem Witchcraft by Charles Upham. Okay? And so go back to page 3 there, and we talk about dates. So September 1692, that was the last day the hangings were held. And so then in October, this court of Oyer and Terminer was disbanded. So Oyer and Terminer means that they were it was told, and then people were talked about. Okay, so that was disbanded. Then, and the reason they used this court of Oyer and Terminator like they did was because that's what the judge believed in. He believed in spectral evidence. He believed in the truth of that. And that's why he wanted his time spent. And also because it was fast acting, because, they didn't have to prove anything. They didn't have to go to trial. They didn't have a jury. They just brought up this person who'd been named as a witch, and then they could go from there and just go ahead and make her guilty, because everybody was saying she's guilty. So why have a prosecutor standing there saying you're guilty? So then they passed a resolution in 1711 that attempted to reverse this general court, but it didn't work. So Susanna and these 4 other people, including Sarah Good here, they would remain convicted of witchcraft for nearly 300 years. So in 1945, they tried to resurrect this again, and a bill was introduced to clear these last 6 names, but nothing happened. 12 years later, another resolution was finally passed that pardoned this woman by the name of Anne and certain other persons, but they didn't name the certain other persons. And finally then, in 92, they did a memorial in Danvers, that Salem village that was where the farmers were. They changed the name from Salem Village to Danvers. Danvers. Okay, so 2001 now, we're down there. The missing names were finally added to a resolve in October of 2001, and they formally cleared these names. 2017 was the 323rd anniversary of Susanna's execution. So they celebrated that. And then finally, just a year ago, they erected they named a part of a highway up by Amesbury where she lived and George lived. They named the road after her. So finally, it only took all of this amount of time for this to finally get settled. And it was, and I realize now that I never told you how it got started. Salem Village had a pastor by the name of Parrish. Last name was Parrish. He lived in this parsonage that was given to him by the community. He had a little girl, Abigail and Elizabeth. Elizabeth was, his little girl was 8, and Abigail was 11. Abigail was a cousin, and she was a cousin whose parents had been killed by the Native Americans. So we got these two little girls together in this house, and Pastor Parrish's wife has died, and his family was involved in Barbados in the sugar cane fields, grew sugar cane. And he had slaves down there in Barbados. So when he decides to move back up to Massachusetts, he takes his slave with him. Her name is Tituba, and she's married and she has a husband named John. So they both remain slaves and moved to Massachusetts. Tituba spends time with the little girls telling them stories about witchcraft. Okay, so then the parsonage. There's a man who was supposed to keep the parsonage in wood, keep it warm, keep the fires roaring, so to speak. And he doesn't like Pastor Parrish, so he doesn't do what he said he was going to do. So the parsonage is cold. It's winter, and it's cold, and these little girls are trying to find ways to get warmer, and so they're running through the house rambunctiously, and they even tried to climb the chimney. I mean, they tried everything under the sun. And then, of course, you have Tituba in the kitchen, who's feeding them stories about witchcraft, and it's just a difficult situation to be in. And then he is supposed to be writing these 2-hour sermons, which are supposed to be just so wonderful. Well, he's having a really hard time. He knows people don't like him. He knows that he's not fulfilling everything that people want out of him as a minister. And so this is this is where we got the schisms started in the church, and that bills and bills and bills. And then the little girls go to church. Okay, well, attendance in church is highly, highly, highly expected, to the point where every time they had a church service, they had two young men, who would walk the entire town. And if they find that you're not in church, they want to know why. And if you don't come up with a good enough explanation, you will end up in the stocks in the middle of town for 2 hours. So you got this going on, and people were assigned seats in the church and assigned rows, and it just was a lot. Was a lot of one-upmanship, so to speak. So then the little girls started acting out in church, pointing fingers at people in the church. You pinch me, you hurt me, you throw me down, you know, anything. And they get to the point where they are running up and down the aisles. And when you've got a pastor that's up front and the kids are running in the aisles, oh my goodness, we got a problem. And it's just such it's just so remarkably awful. And so then that's when people started saying, we have to put together this court system, pull it together. And so they do. They pull it together. And within this short amount of time, they're hanging people. There was one man that was killed. He was pressed. He asked to be pressed rather than hung. And so he is laid on the ground. There was a board laid on top of him, and then rocks were placed on top of him then, to the point where he would suffocate. And for 3 days he said, more rocks, before he finally died. The man was 81 years old, for Pete's sake, and he had a lot of property. And he wanted to make sure that his property could be sold, would not be sold or stolen by any of the neighbors. He wanted his 2 sons-in-law to inherit that land. So he thought if he died slowly this way, he could keep his eye more on his property. Well, he eventually died. His property was stolen from him by the neighbors. So everything that he was trying to prevent didn't work. So that's how this all started. Was just like that. So do you have any questions?
What happened to the girls? When
Nothing.
people discovered that they were lying?
Nothing.
Nothing? All of a sudden they just stopped the whole court.
Yes, and how it stopped, thank you for that question. How it stopped was the little girls went and stood in front of the wife of the governor of Massachusetts and said, "You hurt me." They tried to blame her, the governor's wife, and the governor said, "That's it, no more. We're not doing this anymore." And that's how it ended. Very simply, to the point. And so they didn't. You know, and the thing that I noticed when I was looking at this direct descendants that my sister had put together, that none of the members of the family left the county of Essex or left that area for 100 years after that happened. And they only left because they married into families that left the area. So, I mean, so you see how stuck these poor people were. They were just stuck in their pain and stayed there. So Pastor Parrish did eventually have to leave because he just felt that the community, the church, you know, was against him to the point where he could no longer do anything. So then they brought in a pastor who stayed the rest of his entire time in the ministry and to try to heal the congregation from all of the everything that had happened. Which then brings me to this man here, whose name is Judge Sewell. Judge Sewell was one of 7 judges that was working on this Oyer and Terminer business. And he was very conflicted by what he had taken part in, and he was the only one out of the 7 judges that were working with this that he felt so upset about the decisions that he himself had made with all of the people, that all the women who had died. And his name was Judge Sewell. Well, the judge went before his congregation 5 years later, wrote a petition asking for forgiveness, confessing his sins, asking for forgiveness. And an artist came along and painted this picture. And this picture is so large. And it's now right here, right there in the Salem, Massachusetts, where they meet, where the legislature meets in Salem, right there. And it has been there since 1945, that picture. So that picture is constantly in front of them, which I think is really good, because it reminds them, what a subtle reminder of, look what we did 332 years ago, you know. So, look what happens. Are there any other questions? Yes, ma'am?
Did you address why people believe the girls?
Tell me more.
I think there was something somebody found out about that, about children being born without sin.
Yes. You told me that.
I think Nettie did, yeah.
Nettie did?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead and tell them that.
Well, yeah, a friend of mine was in Salem, and she had said that they believed the girls because children were seen as being born without sin.
So that was why it was so easy then. Because if they were born without sin, that's another reason why you should believe her. Yeah. I think that's an important piece. Thank you for reminding me of that.
I also recall hearing that sometimes when you were accused, from like, for say, the witch hunters or the people that you would be or would not be imprisoned or found guilty if you're willing to give up names of other people.
Yes.
And I was kind of like, I thought that was interesting that, so as long as I'm willing to give up names of other people who are witches, they would not imprison me or find me guilty until at that, immediately.
That is true, yes. So that's why Tituba was never hung, because she named others. So, I just about jumped out of the chair when I found this on the computer that this company was selling, and this is a shower curtain, It's what it is. And you what?
That would be scary to walk into a bathroom and see that.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I plan on hanging it. Yeah, but I honestly did not really notice her. I was so enthralled with, there's the woods. I want to talk about the woods. And then all of a sudden, she became a real part of this. So, and I knew nothing when I started this in January. I knew nothing. Now I know too much. But I've never spent so much time and effort and just like, oh my goodness, I don't believe this kind of reaction. So that's why I decided I wasn't going to stand here for 4 hours and read all that writing to you. That's your homework. You could take that home with you. But I just thought I'd tell you a few little stories about it. Okay? You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much.